Welcome all of you to this important gubernatorial forum. As chair of the Campaign for College Opportunity, it's my great pleasure to welcome you all here for a very important discussion. Here in California, we know that our challenges are many, but beyond that, we are justly expected to be nationwide, indeed global leaders on so many issues, whether that's water, housing, environment, immigration, and certainly K through 12 education. But too often, one of the issues that is neglected in the midst of all of those challenges is higher education. Indeed, we read every week about tuition increases or about concerns about spending or concerns about lack of seats in our institutions of higher education, but we don't get much discussion about a coherent policy for higher education. So that ends with these forums, because we are talking to the major gubernatorial candidates, getting their perspective on these issues and encouraging them to make this a central part of their agenda. This forum is a part of that overall effort, and we know that we will have a vigorous discussion today. In the next decade, California needs to produce 1.7 million more college degrees in its population. And indeed, in less than a decade, we have to increase the proportion of our adult population with a bachelor's degree by more than 10%. That's the scope of the challenge. We therefore need our next governor to champion these issues, and tonight's discussion is an important part of producing that. It's then my great pleasure on behalf of the Campaign for College Opportunity to introduce our two discussants. First of all, someone who needs no introduction. She has been the campaign's leader for many years and has acquired a nationwide reputation as a champion of the need for higher education completeness and the need for equity in higher education completion. Our president, Michele Siqueiros, will be engaging our state treasurer, John Chiang. Michele.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, all of you, for joining us today in this exciting gubernatorial forum to talk strictly about higher education. Thank you, State Treasurer John Chiang, for joining us today. We're very excited about this conversation with you. And I wanted to just start by sharing with all of you, 14 years ago when the Campaign for College Opportunity was founded by baby boomers, they really saw their life's dedication to higher education being threatened. They had personally benefited by the promise of college opportunity enshrined in the master plan for higher education that allowed them to go to college for free. And they were concerned that that same promise would not be available for this next generation of students. And so we come to this work with that similar passion, having been the first in my family to go to college. My mother immigrated to this country with only a 6th grade education. And she knew that if I went to college, all my dreams might be possible. And that certainly proved to be true. And so we feel, all of the team at the Campaign for College Opportunity feels that we owe our life's work and purpose to ensure that promise for others like us. So today we're incredibly excited to talk to one of the gubernatorial candidates, State Treasurer John Chiang. I've heard you say many, many times that your focus is really to destroy the entrenched cycle of poverty. And I know that two of your top issues are education and housing affordability, which many would argue are intrinsically tied. So I thought it would be a good idea to start off by just asking you, why do you want to be governor of California?
Well, thank you for this extraordinary opportunity. It's great to be with all of you. Like so many others, unless you're Native American, your family at some generation is an immigrant. And so my parents are immigrants who came to this country with not much. My dad came with 3 shirts, 2 pairs of pants, not much money. My mom came, scrubbed floors, paid for her English lessons at a junior college. But they knew that America was, and in my estimation today still is, the most aspirational place on earth. And that education is the key to the American dream. My dad learned English as his 5th language to get that PhD, and they knew that if you get an education, it's absolutely transformative. And so they were able to move us from a lower middle income community to a middle income community to give us access to better schooling. I grew up in suburban Chicago. Our family was the first Asian American family in that community. And so I want to pass along to this generation and the next generation, and I'm blessed with 8 godchildren. They reflect California's population. I want to give them an America that was given to me, where hopefully what sets you at the top is the heavens, right? If you work hard, you do the right thing, if community comes together, we will create great communities for every single child. Not everybody's going to be a debate partner of Thomas, like my friend Ron Wong, right? But hopefully, anything is possible, and I want to make sure that California lives vibrantly in the hearts and imaginations of every single Californian.
Thank you. And we have a not so recent picture of you up in the screen. I believe that's you in the arms of your mom.
Yeah.
And I've heard you in other interviews talk about how your friends were a little scared of your mom because she was always on them about doing their homework and what grades they were getting. Do you want to share a little bit more?
Oh, absolutely. So my mom's a very loving mom, but she's a tough Asian mom, right? So you've heard the term tiger mom. So Dave Jones, as I mentioned, our insurance commissioner, was my high school classmate. And so Dave was the MC of my 2 inaugurals. And when Dave was introducing me, and my then 75-year-old mom was there, and he turns around, introduces her, and says, "Every time I see Mrs. Chung, I get beads of sweat pouring down my neck." Right? So we had a lot of cultural conflict growing up. We're the first Asian American family, a lot of Asian values, good values, respect your elders, treat people well. Part of that hardship was, it's like, Mom, this is America, right? This isn't Taiwan, right? So we have to understand this culture. And my mom just wanted to make sure that we got really good grades, that we were good people. And so we would argue, and I said, Mom, I want to play football, I want to play basketball, I want to be in student government, I just want to be involved in all these activities. And so in high school, she sort of compromised. And so she said, like, once every month or 2 months, you can have your kids come over, or your friends come over, and they can study at our house, right? And you'd have like 15 kids to 45, 50 kids, depending if it's closer to exam time. We would study, my mom would cook, and my mom's a fantastic cook, and then some of them would stay over, and then because we went to church every Sunday at 10 a.m., and sometimes before we had our driver's licenses, my mom would start driving them all home, right? But my mom would promise the other parents that those kids were going to get good grades, right? Because she says, if you're under my care, you're going to get good grades. So my mom was tough on me, but she was tough on them, right? And the other parents could trust my mom, right? One of them, the unnamed, would call and say, is my son there? And my mom would check, is he here? And I said, no, he's probably, and I was trying to make sure my friend didn't get in trouble. I call over to his girlfriend's house and I said, where are they, right? His dad called, make sure he gets over to my house so that my mom, because my mom's not going to cover for him, that he doesn't get in trouble. So yes, but that's part of this, right? That's why community and family and friends, right? There's a Stanford study that says, the people in your life, the impact you as to access to information. That access to information impacts your quality of life, your happiness, your financial success. And so that's why your work is so important, that we close that divide, that opportunity divide, that close that financial divide, to close that social divide that impacts communities of high opportunity versus communities that are yet to be communities of high opportunity.
So your mom is proof that it definitely takes a village, and I suspect many, many people owe her big thanks for pushing them along. So I'd like to ask you, what was your college experience like? I've heard you say that your college education was definitely your entree to achieving the American dream. So can you tell us about your own college experience and how that informs your platform?
So early on, my parents imbued good habits. They said, you're going to have to get scholarships, right? We're going to do everything we can, but middle income family, we're not going to be able to cover it all. So actually, when I was young, I felt a lot of financial pressure to make sure we did well in school, plus what my mom did, trying to make sure that we applied for all financial aid. I appreciate your efforts to make sure that people fill out the financial aid forms, because too many people don't partake and they leave money on the table. And people that have better access have that information. We need to make sure that we close that gap. One of those things is, people don't know, how to access all the money that they're entitled to. One of the things that I did, and I wanted to recognize Nadia, who was one of my star employees early on, right? If you were going to work for John Chiang when you were the state controller, we did free income taxes from January to April 15th, because there's nothing for me more disturbing to watch families struggle and leave money with the federal government, where you can get up to, back then, $5,200, $5,300, and people are worried about where you're going to make your next utility payment, or you're going to make that next rental payment. Today, it's up to $13,000, right? We can move people higher out of the margins, right, if they had that access. So one of the things I want to do is systematize getting access to that information. So early on, my parents used to take us to the bank, so $1 a week in the bank. And right, little habits have powerful long-term impacts. So not including what Einstein says is the most powerful thing, compound interest, right? Even without interest, if you deposited $4 a week, you would pay for community college after 17 years of savings, right? And think what that AA degree does to improve your opportunities for the long-term trajectory of every individual's life. So they save money, and then I want to encourage all of you. I chair the state scholarship committee. Try to provide matching grants, because if you invest and you start a college savings program for a child, they have a 7 times increased likelihood of going to college, right? Little things make that difference. So my parents put in that idea, you're definitely going to school, you're definitely going to college, you're going to do well. And I was fortunate. I came across some good community organizations. The Asian community wasn't very big way back when, 2 years prior to my birth. In 1960, shows how America was different. Detroit was the highest per capita income city in the United States of America. Think of the automobile industry. And America was, and the numbers are wrong, was 3.5% Latino. These are Pew numbers, right? Undercount for Latinos, and 0.6% Asian Americans, just to show how dramatic a transformation we've had in our country. Which goes to the point, not much money in regards to Asian scholarships. I remember I was so excited. I got a $50 savings bond for doing really well in school. And then I was one of the B'nai B'rith Chicago Youth of the Year Award winners, and I got $1,500. So I went off to DePaul University, where I won the top accounting scholarship. Basically, I did it for the finances, right? And the school was terrific, but there wasn't much of a social life, right? And I had waited for 17 years, and no disrespect to mom and dad, I waited 17 years for freedom, right? And to be on my own, and it just wasn't all that enjoyable. I transferred to University of South Florida, right? It was a fun school, right? It was ranked by one of those magazines as one of the great party schools. I'm not a big partier, so
we don't believe you.
Yeah, some have heard my terrible karaoke. So I tried it with some friends, some dorm mates. We went out to the beach, we studied, and I was sweating because it's so humid, and I said, that's the last time I'm doing that. I can't study on the beach. So I was one of those displaced northerners who studied a lot while I was at the University of South Florida.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. So I should warn you that I was a little bit nervous starting the interview, because when I asked my daughter, as I was preparing for these forums, I said, well, what do you think I should ask the candidates running for governor? She said, Mom, just don't ask them any dumb questions. So I've got friends here that might report back to my daughter, so I'm just warning you that I'm going to start asking you some harder questions, hopefully.
She's very maternal.
She's a teenager, too, as you can probably tell by that comment.
Well, this is about her image.
Exactly. So I want to talk a little bit about, I started by talking about the master plan, and obviously the master plan was incredibly ahead of its time in the 1960s. I think most of us would argue, and I think we're right in saying that that is what has made California the 6th largest economy in the world. It was very clear about expanding access and making college affordable, created the biggest system of of community colleges in the world, the Cal State, the UC. But it was very focused on sort of the institutional role of what those institutions would do. And it was 1960. So here we are in 2018, and my son is a big soccer player, so I love soccer analogies, and there's a quote that says, the trouble with not having a goal is that you can spend your life running up and down the field and never score, right? And I would say that that's where California is today, that we don't have any goals for higher education, certainly no statewide goals, and I believe that it's critical for the next governor to have a goal. So I'm interested in your thoughts about that. You mentioned the workforce shortage. What do you think about having a goal? Are you committed to setting one forward if you are elected governor of California?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, not specifically, but consistently, my top value and reason I'm running for governor is I want to make sure that we have a world-class educational system, right? That's, as I pointed out, the very notion of why my parents left their homeland. They said goodbye to their parents and brothers and sisters, left their culture in a very, very different time. And so education is not my top priority, and you heard me say it first. Actually, higher education is my second priority. Early childhood education is number one, because if you don't get early childhood education right, higher education becomes secondary, right? Because they never get access to higher education. So you have to start early, right? Do that cognitive neural development, spark the interest, making sure they're psychologically well adjusted. And then, frankly, what I want for California for education, but the whole thing is that California's future is synonymous with the American dream. And so we understand, and you pointed out, if we don't do higher education correctly, which is really one of the lifelines for California's economy, we're not going to be vibrant in the 21st century, right? We generate so much economic activity, we generate so much self-fulfillment and meaningness in people's lives based on how they grow, and the community colleges are that entryway, right? But we know that they have a disrupted path to CSU and UC, and that's a failure of leadership, right? That's where we need the leaders from each of those organizations to say, hey, what is in the best interest, and what do we do process-wise to make sure that this works, right? We need to destroy the inefficiencies in those programs, because we know for many of these individuals, time is consequential. Finances are incredibly challenging, and we don't want to waste their lives. So they need to accept ownership. CSU, which educates, we know, a disproportionate amount of the graduates in the United States of America, too many, and this is across systems, are housing, food, insecure, and so it's just not the tuition costs, right, but you have to look at things holistically. One of the things that I signed on to last week when I put out my higher education plan, so I don't know how many of you covered it, was I signed on to a United States Senator from Hawaii's plan where he wants debt-free college, right? So, for me, the only person who served in all three financial offices in the state of California and having a mom who wasted no nickels, right? My mom, if there was a can of beans on sale for 22 cents the week before and it was 27 cents the next week, my mom would negotiate for the 22 cents that was available the previous week. That's why, as your state controller and as your state treasurer, I'm tough with the buck, right? Because I want to make sure that those resources are used to increase the quality of life and opportunities for every single Californian. So I signed on to Senator Schatz's plan to do that because, frankly, we want to maximize every dollar that's available, public and private sector, against the state's contribution, right? Because we can't continue to have the deterioration in the state's financial support for community colleges, CSU, and UC. So that total objective is we have to be number one in all. I went to the UC Board of Regents meeting a couple weeks ago, and just to watch the decline in so many categories for our UC colleges relative to programs throughout this nation, that's never California. And when I'm governor, that's not going to be acceptable, right? I want all of our children to go to a UC college or CSU that's #1 in its category. And so we're going to press upon all those things, making sure that there's the appropriate financial investment, there's transparency, that we invest reflecting that it's our top priority.
Yes, I appreciate that. And we did have a chance to look at your plan, so I appreciate you bringing it up because you have raised a lot of these issues around accountability by institutions and affordability. I want to push you a little bit more on a goal. You know, we have called for a 60% goal by 2030. We believe 60% of adults need some level of post-secondary education. It's aligned with the 1.1 million more bachelor's degrees that PPIC has put out. And if you add community college certificates, 60% gets you there. Would you support a 60% attainment goal by 2030 for California?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Excellent, thank you. And then I want to piggyback off your comment about debt-free college. I think everybody is supportive of the idea that students should leave college with as little debt as possible, debt-free even better. How do you envision making that happen? And if you could speak a little more to, you know, some of the focus has been on just free community college. I love that your plan is much more holistic around the full cost of college. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so in my plan, it's 2 years of free community college. Here's another thing where I'm competitive, right? I don't like California being behind Tennessee. So right, we know that Tennessee had their plan that they put out a few years ago where, you know, students get free community college. Part of their plan was a little bit different in that the students have to apply for all financial aid. You either do some work study or you participate in some type of service program, and then the state makes up the difference. You know, California ought to be making that happen. And part of this is we need to bring the full host of resources. For instance, I sit on the boards of CalSTRS and CalPERS. CalSTRS has done some investment in regards to student housing a little bit near San Luis Obispo, right? But we need to align all our resources, all the participants, so that we're investing things that make money but provide an important investment good. So, you know, I want to make sure that we're directing resources, and as your state treasurer, one of my top priorities, because we know it impacts Californians, is when you calculate cost of transportation and housing, 1 in every 5 of us, Californians, live in poverty, and that's unacceptable. So I'm going to be driving a lot of those resources to make sure that it's accessible, and part of that is student housing. As the state treasurer, after I did a first year of regulatory reform, by my second year, we increased the financing of new housing by 83%. I included some special needs categories, but part of that is going to be making sure that we take care of housing for students. And then we have to partner with the financial, the educational institutions, and others. So I toured Imperial Valley College, right on the border of the United States and Mexico. What I like is they have student success counselors. Right, but also what they do specifically is they target how many homeless students and students of need, financial need there are. So I think they were talking about there's like 83 or 85 homeless students, right? So they do the wraparound planning. They want to, if the student is taking care of family members and they say, okay, this family is housing insecure, or this family is food insecure, we're going to provide them, and they come in and we provide them with 9 meals. So the student not only takes care of themselves, but they take care of that type of their family, looking at them holistically. So that's the type of partnerships and leadership that we want to provide. The legislature provided me with a healthy foods committee, but they provided no staff, right? And so I can't misuse the resources in the treasurer's office, but as governor, I'll finance that because we have to make sure that we have leadership in those areas: housing, food, the other costs that impact the student in addition to tuition fees and books.
Great. And now that I know you don't like California being behind, I'm going to share another troubling statistic with you. So California is 49th in the nation in sending students directly from high school to four-year universities. And part of that is by design. We have a system that sends 2/3 of undergrads or the top 100% to community college and only the top third to the Cal State and the UC. We are concerned there's no way to meet a 60% goal or close gaps for students of color if we continue to send so few to the UC and the CSU. So if you're elected governor, would you revisit the caps for UC, CSU?
Yes, we're going to put in more money, right? You've seen it in my plan. I want to drop tuition and fees back to 2008-2000 school year, what those rates look like. I am going to push aggressively to make sure that we have the best practices, the best internal controls at the educational institutions. I was the most successful auditor when I was your California controller. I did $9.5 billion of audit findings. My predecessor's predecessor, so Steve Wesley was my predecessor, Kathleen Connell was Steve's predecessor. She had, until my service, been the most successful auditor. She did $2.5 billion of audit findings, right? So there's always room for improvement. And then I want to make sure that our business operations at UC, CSU are optimized. We underperform so many ways in state government. We have between 60 to 80,000 properties that are not fully optimized in state government. We don't do well with asset management. Bill Bogart's really smart in this area, City of Pasadena, but I want to make sure that our institutions of higher education follow along those lines. And so with those additional monies, we will prioritize, and I will prioritize California students. When parents and other taxpayers have paid all through the life of that child an investment with the hope and opportunity and belief that their child has better access to the University of California or CSU than an out-of-state student, if you want to establish trust, you better keep that trust. And so that will be my priority.
So I did see in your plan that you talk about a reliable source of funding for higher education, and you've talked about, the audits and how to find some of those resources. What are other ways? I'm hearing you say education's a priority, we're going to invest more money. How?
So a lot of tools. I think if you look at my record, I've put out a lot of ideas to bring in additional revenues to the state of California. If you read the LA Times, they took great kudos to the Attorney General, Javier Becerra and Kathleen Galgiani. I led a lot of those efforts on the underground economy. When I became a Board of Equalization member, I first started those underground economy seminars here in Southern California, first at Koreatown, but a lot of the people didn't want to meet in Koreatown, so they took it out to Palm Springs. So I appreciate the Attorney General and Kathleen Galgiani saying, when you're missing out on $8.5 billion worth of potential revenues for the state of California, but not only that, with the Attorney General and a potential Board of Equalization member, you need a governor who's going to direct his agency staff to fully engage to make sure that's a reality. I used to attend those seminars up in Sacramento. If we get to a difficult point, what do you do in regards to tax amnesty? And today, as the state treasurer, I've worked aggressively because of our improved credit situation to save all of us $6.5 billion in a little over 3 years in regards to refinancing. So there's a lot of pots that if we're more effective. I mentioned my audits. Some of my audits, I audited the debt collection practices of the state of California. You have some terrific California Highway Patrol, but the California Highway Patrol, and you can understand it, law enforcement officials don't want to engage in debt collection. It's like, hey, we want to protect public safety. We're not necessarily interested in making sure that people who violate the law are paying over their fines. Different area, right? I sued the Bush administration when I was the controller to protecting our mineral rights. So there's a lot of pockets where we'll find money so that we can invest in education.
That's great. So we're going to turn over to a student that's joining us via our TV screen here, and she's going to ask you a question.
Terrific.
Hi, my name is Alejandra Gordillo. I'm a fifth-year clinical nutrition major here at UC Davis. Students here are one of the most vulnerable populations facing the statewide housing crisis and with no guaranteed student housing after the first year. My question to you is, how do you plan to approach the basic needs of students when the vacancy rate is only 0.5% here in the whole city of UC Davis?
So I actually visited UC Davis, and I visited the agriculture where they have the healthy farms. Right, really incredible work. When you think that today in California we produce enough food to feed everybody on a daily basis, but because of the misallocation of moving that food, so many people were made food insecure. Right, and these numbers are staggering when food insecure being defined, people not knowing where they're getting their next meal. Right, in certain communities, right, it's nearly half. If in San Diego, if you look at the zip code, it's the area around the Camp Pendleton. So people who are serving this country, willing to give up their life, their family members, their spouses and kids, are food insecure, right? That should never take place in this place. But specifics on my housing plan. So for instance, I mentioned a little bit of what I did. I hope all of you will vote for the housing bond that is on the ballot upcoming. I pushed aggressively for a housing bond. I brought together builders, the workers, nonprofit organizations. We were looking at putting together a $6 to $9 billion bond. Governor Brown said $4 billion bond was the top. Right back as governor, I would bring back an additional bond to make sure that there was a sustainable source of funding. I don't know how many of you actually know the intricacies of building affordable housing, but there's a federal, state, and local government component. The federal government, especially during the Trump administration, has really been attacking their support for building more affordable housing, but it also happened during the previous administration, really because of Congress. The state has not been in a good financial position, so we have not been a reliable partner in building more housing. So that's why I want to go out for a bond. And then I also want to take out of our general fund on an annual basis at least $250 million so we build more affordable housing. And then I would bring back redevelopment agencies. I was the first candidate to say I would give back to local governments, the redevelopment agencies. We know that during the financial crisis, we had deferred payments to education by $10 billion. So Governor Brown was trying to work a compromise with local governments and say, you know, I need some of that money back so we don't delay payments to education. There was a difference. Some of the cities engaged in litigation with Governor Brown. They were unsuccessful, so Governor Brown eliminated the redevelopment agencies. So local governments lost their #1 source of funding for redevelopment agencies. So I want to reestablish a partner with local governments and bring back redevelopment agencies. So that's a little bit of what I would do to make sure that we had the financing to make sure that we could build more housing, including student housing.
Great. So now I want to change topics a little bit. I want to talk about, you know, the incredible diversity of California, right? We started the conversation, you sharing your story and talking about 1960 stats versus today. And that's very true in California higher education. 69% of our public higher education students are students of color. 54% of undergraduate students in California are women. But yet, even though California is seen as very progressive and supportive of diversity, we certainly haven't done enough to close the gaps that exist. So in terms of college preparedness for students of color, for Black, Latinx, Asian American students, it's uneven. In terms of college completion, it's uneven. Mm-hmm. What would you do to prioritize and demand that our institutions close those gaps?
Once they get to higher education or before there, right? Because if we know that that's why I supported early childhood education. You can't have San Francisco where if you're white or Chinese American, you perform very well, and then if you're, and these are Los Angeles Times, right? Latino, African American, and Pacific Islander, right? You have that extraordinary achievement gap. So it has to start early on. My philosophy is education is school site leadership, right? I know some people have questions about the dashboard, right? But you have to have accountability. And so part of this is everybody in that system has to be accountable for the child's academic achievement and cognitive development. Principal, vice principal, school employee, teacher, right? Are the teachers are they well-trained? Are they well-led? Are they well-supported? Is there professional development, right? And what's the relationship with the parent, right? Because most of those studies say number one factor outside of the classroom is parental involvement, right? And I'll have teachers complain, right? This child's unruly and the parent won't back me up. Or I used to give to city people, so my friends used to be involved, and I was visiting an elementary school, and my friend who was part of that thing was, introduced me to a second grade Latino child. First grade, kid was terrific, right? Smiley faces, good kid, good attitude. Second grade, still good attitude, but he was sleeping in school, right? And so they tracked the child and his family of economic struggle. Mom's making tamales, out on the street, late into the evening, immigrant, not very well educated. The boy and brothers and sisters, I don't remember brothers and sisters, right? Out on the street with mom so she could take care of them, right? Not getting the support, right? That's why I said it's community. That's why it's community. And they were struggling, what do you do with that child, right? He's tired, he's hungry. Should we bring him into school early, an hour earlier so he can get tutorial? But you're thinking, he's already sleep deprived, right? So those are the real life struggles that all of us have to come together and work on. And frankly, for me, you got to do longitudinal studies, right? You got to track everybody. So because we have to be responsive on an individual basis to make sure that every child is successful.
So would you be comfortable, I mean, you've talked in your plan about holding colleges accountable to improved outcomes and being responsive to diverse student bodies. I guess I'm wondering, what do you think that looks like? How would you hold colleges accountable for that?
Well, you have to call them out if they're not performing. You have to make sure, part of this is in getting that assistance. Not only, Indiana helps students early on track where they are financially. Because you'll have students early on who start off, they're on their path, and they run out of money. That should never happen. But part of that is early planning, right? It wasn't designed in my family, we had the money. But we ought to have those financial counselors, the psychological counselors, everything early on with a child, not grade school, but junior high school, so that they have a long-term pathway. And so that they understand what's coming from the state bend, who do you reach out to in regards to the private sector, what happens from the various elements, so that we can develop fully the opportunities for each and every single student.
Okay. So a little pop culture trivia here. Many of us recently flooded to the theaters to see Black Panther. Have you seen it?
I have seen it, yeah.
And many of us also were incredibly moved by the movie Coco. Have you seen that?
I did see it. Luckily, those are the only two now.
I'm going to stop while we're ahead here. But I think what was so incredibly moving for many of us is to see ourselves reflected in the screen, right? And I like to talk a lot about both the positivity of Black Panther in terms of an amazing story, a complete African-American cast, just empowering. And Coco, really a beautiful tribute to an amazing tradition that Mexicans and Mexican-Americans have around honoring those that have passed. And just the power of both of those movies also demonstrated that they can be authentic to honoring culture and still make a lot of money, right? And with Coco, I always love to tell the story about how when Coco was first being produced by Disney, they went ahead and tried to copyright Dia de los Muertos, and faced this incredible backlash, rightfully so, from the Mexican American community, because how can you copyright something that is authentic to our culture? It forced the folks at Disney to actually bring on cultural consultants, to hire a Mexican American director, and to really think about how they approach this movie. And they did it proactively after that first, maybe erroneous trip, and did a wonderful job and won an Oscar for it. Recently, we released a report called Left Out, how exclusion in California public higher education hurts our values, our students, and our economy. And the report found that, as I shared earlier, 69% of our students are students of color, and yet 2/3 of the faculty at our public colleges and universities are white. And when we disaggregated the data to look at academic senators and senior leaders, we found very little diversity, very little representation, very little reflection for students when they go to campus to see themselves, right, and the power of that. In particular, I'm interested in your thoughts about that, because I know that you care about serving diverse student bodies well.
Yeah, it's transformative. So one of the things, I grew up, as I mentioned, in an America that did not look like me. So my childhood heroes were Martin Luther King and Cesar Chavez. So when you're young, you don't really understand people, but you understand Martin Luther King fighting for opportunity, right, and being evaluated by the content of your character and not the color of your skin. And then Cesar Chavez, I would just watch on TV, and I just saw somebody struggling for poor people, right? So not a lot of depth. And so I pay tribute to Martin Luther King in his celebration every year. And one of the things I used to do is I participate in the parade, and then I would go home and I watch Oprah when she was still on TV. And then I would go to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference dinner. And Oprah was doing one particular segment on Beverly Tatum's book, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? Right, sociology professor, Mount Holyoke, elsewhere. And so a lot of it was social identity. And so they would ask, like, the white kids, you know, how do you view yourselves relative to the others, right? And yeah, we're more powerful, and right, versus the black, you know, the Latino, the Asians, right? Blacks, Latinos felt the same way. We don't have the same role models. We don't have, right, the same people that we could look up to. The Asians felt the same way. You know, we're not powerful. We don't have anybody that we can view. And part of this is what I was trying to, and a lot of my work is social identity theory, right? How do we identify with each other, right? And we have to make sure that our social identification is much more than just skin color, right? You know, what brings us together, how we overcame the discrimination my mom and my family faced. My mom said, just be good people. My mom's devoutly Catholic. She's recovered from serious health issues last year. So she's going back to her normal self, going to church nearly every single day and praying for the world's soul, right? And over a period of time, people who were hostile to us at the beginning, right, are people today who will, you know, send a note to me on Facebook, how's your mom doing? All right, you know, just she transformed all of that. So part of that is, yes, we have to accept, you know, new phases of leadership and understanding that's good and healthy for all of us. Right? And so we have to get out of our own historical context if it's especially limiting. And unfortunately, I think that's the battle we're engaged in with Washington, D.C. Whether it's exclusive, wealthy, privileged communities, or those who, because of, you know, geography, social economics, don't have proximity and relationships with people that may be a little bit more diverse than those communities, right? It's incumbent upon all of us to transform, you know, how we engage, how we relate, how do we outreach. And that's how, and part of that is the academic institutions and what will be taught, the manner in which it would be taught, and the focus of, you know, what that educational lesson is going to be.
So a real specific ask, in our report we found that 60% of the UC Board of Regents are white. 70% of CSU trustees and Board of Governors are white. 2/3 of all of those, if you add them up, are men, even though 54% of our undergraduates are women. I'm wondering if you will make a commitment to appoint more women and more people of color to those bodies if you are elected governor.
Yeah, and then, right, you didn't talk about the Asians, right? Not until recently they get an Asian on the UC who worked for Jerry Brown, and where is one on the CSU? So if past this prologue, if you want to look at, you know, what my office looks like, 75% of my senior staff are women or people of color. Part of this is just how I engage. When I came to California, before I was ever in politics, I was a member of the Ethnic Coalition. So is African Americans, Latinos, Asians working together on economic and social justice issues? Because we're not part of the power structure, or we weren't back then, right? Those of us who are in need to make sure that we continue to bring younger people in, people who have historically been excluded. And then if you look at my work, I've been leading an effort nationally. As I mentioned, I sit on the boards of CalPERS and CalSTRS. So we are the nation's 2 largest public pension plans. And so in my second year in office, I said we need more people of color on corporate boards. It can't be just all government rules telling people how to lead this country, right? You need moral, economic, social leadership that is going to drive the company behavior. The next year after that, I said we need more women on corporate boards. A few years later, I said we need more LGBTQI members on corporate boards. And then a few years ago, I invited Betty Yee, after we spoke at the United Nations, to ask CalPERS and CalSTRS to have more individuals with climate change risk expertise on corporate boards, right? Because you want to make sure that as you're governing, governance isn't just the public sector. The governance comes from each and every single one of us. How healthy is our democracy is the ability for each and every one of us to influence. And we see it today, right? We see it once again, the young generation rising. So that's what's really transformative and exciting.
So speaking of the young generation rising, one of my heroes, who's a master's student at CSUN, is here. George is going to ask you a question.
So yeah, my name is George Reyes Salinas, and I am the voting student trustee for the California State University Board of Trustees. And I'm also a master's student graduating this spring from Communication Studies from Cal State Northridge. So as a DACA recipient, my question relates to the approximately 750,000 students in higher education. If you were elected governor, what policies can you enact or strengthen that will make sure that all undocumented individuals will access an affordable and quality higher education?
Yeah, we're gonna enforce California values. Before this whole Donald Trump acting against what's in America's best interests, I've been supportive, whether at Cal for the students participating in gatherings, but I think part of this is what you do individually. So I actually have on staff somebody who began as an intern. She didn't go to CSUN. She went to UCLA. When she graduated, we hired her. She's a DACA student. So I'm not going to say her name because who knows what happens in the future. But we're going to do everything to protect her, right? Because these are American values, right? When people do well, and frankly, part of I think American values is you keep a promise. So President Obama pushed it. He said, if you come forward, if you register, right? If you go to school, if you serve it for this country in the military, if you're working, we're going to create that pathway. And so, as governor, I'm going to do everything we can, not just in the state of California, but the governor has a big platform, works with other governors, and so whether it's what I've done with cannabis or on financial issues, I'm certainly going to do on immigration issues with all those who are willing. My pleasure.
So I know that you're a big numbers guy, and you understand the power of numbers and data to really inform action. And one of the big concerns we continue to have in our state is that we have a really poor data system. In spite of the billions that we invest in education, there's no way to track a student from preschool, kindergarten, middle school, high school, into college, out of college, into the workforce, so that we can see really what is happening, what are we doing well, what are we doing not so well. In higher education, as you know, Governor Brown defunded the California Post-Secondary Education Commission, so there's really no transparent, independent mechanism for collecting data and research. So many of us do what we can with the information that is available. I'm interested in hearing you speak to that. Do you care about that issue, and what would you do about it?
Oh, absolutely. It drives me nuts so when you think about all of our colleges of education, right, we ought to be ground zero as to how we monitor and evaluate. So those longitudinal studies as to what's being taught in college, and frankly, part of my education plan is trying to recruit students out of high school to become teachers early on, right, and change how you change curriculum, because you don't want a whole bunch of students who are education majors who don't get into the classroom until their senior year deciding that they don't like teaching, but economically, because they've gone through 4 years of college, if they're going to get out, go into a classroom and decide to leave after 5 years in the profession. And frankly, our educational practices have to be monitored to make sure if we're going to continue to teach, that what we're doing is actually effective and efficient. And so, yes, we ought to be understanding early on, monitoring, how students are performing. I was the most valuable mathlete on my high school math team, right? The all conference, I know. Only me and Paul from the Wonder Years admit to being a mathlete. So I was really good. The junior year in geometry, I was a good student until one problem set, right? One concept I couldn't get, and I was too embarrassed to ask for help. But luckily, the geometry teacher, Mrs. Goodman, was my math thing. She goes, "John, I know you've always been really good at this," and she goes, "I know you're struggling, right? I'm going to make you stay after school so I can help you work through this, right? Because you're going to get through this and you're going to be fine." Right, and so part of that is like her intervention really helped me. I was still nervous, I was embarrassed, but she just worked through it, right? So, people will have things they're good at, things that they're bad at, but you want the teacher paying attention and monitoring so that if it has long-term effects, right, going into different fields, different applications, those later on will say, oh, they don't have the basic knowledge in this particular area, if they're trying to work on some advanced lesson later on, right? They have to go back to that original building block to up their skills, up their knowledge so that they can be successful later on, because you don't want to put failure on top of failure, right? We need to make sure that we address an issue early on. And then, right, it's my background. I've put up 4 award-winning websites as the controller and treasurer. So yes, I care about data, I care about numbers. Some of you remember the Bell scandal. Right, I started putting up public servants' salaries so that we could identify when 4 or 5 public servants are making $4 million compensation packages. When we were voting on whether to pass higher taxes for education, track Prop 30, some of the people on the other side, I was a proponent. Some of you remember I was on the commercials for the for Prop 30 to bring in additional revenues. They were saying there's going to be no accountability of how those monies are used. And I said, no, I'll be accountable. As the controller, I will design a website that says, how those monies are used in each school district, those Prop 30 dollars. I put up By the Numbers website to look at local jurisdiction finances. As the treasurer, I put up an award-winning website which looks at local government and state government borrowing in regards to bonds. So yes, because I believe in people and people ought to have access, because you're part of the governance for every single community.
So we can count on an award-winning website with good data, pre-K to workforce, if you're elected governor.
You're going to get it up. We always strive for excellence. The award-winning is determined by other people. We don't worry about the award-winning. We just want to make sure it works for all of you.
Fair enough, fair enough. So I have a few last rapid-fire questions that I want to make sure we ask you before we allow you to wrap up with us. The first question is, you heard me talk about the defunding of the California Post-Secondary Education Commission. I'm wondering, will you establish a coordinating body for higher education that would have the capacity to engage in setting a goal for higher education, providing oversight, coordinating our public higher education system, and really promoting more seamless transitions between community colleges, the UC and the CSU?
Yeah, we're inefficient operating in silos.
Great. Will you appoint a Secretary of Education?
Yes.
How about an Undersecretary of Higher Education?
I don't want to pledge all these details, but there'll be somebody who's sensitive, yeah.
Great. And will you have a higher education expert within your senior leadership team?
I'd be crazy not to.
Good. Well, thank you for that. So the final question that we have for you, and then we hope you'll stay and meet folks that have come out. What would you want to tell kindergartners, if you could, about the kind of California that you would build for them? And we pick kindergartners because kindergartners today will be graduating in 2030. And we believe that if you do set a goal of 60%, then it's those kindergartners that get to benefit from the work that you do if you're elected governor. So what promise do you want to make to those kindergartners, and maybe if their attention span is too low, to the parents of kindergartners sitting in this room?
That you could make this Coco, or you can make a Black Panther movie. You can be anything you want.
Love that. So with that, I'd like to introduce one of my favorite people, another hero in the room who came straight from a wonderful trip to another one of my favorite cities, Mexico City, and came straight from the airport to here, Ryan Smith, the head of Education Trust West.
All right, good afternoon. First of all, can we give another round of applause to State Treasurer John Chiang and the amazing Michele Siqueiros? In a short amount of time, you covered a lot of ground, and it was great to hear your thoughts about what you're planning on doing in post-secondary, how you're thinking about the education system in total, and also to hear a little bit more about your story as well. Mathlete, I'll remember that. I think I wrote that down. But also reminded me that 20 years ago, I actually received my acceptance to UCLA. And I was so excited at that time. And as I enrolled as a freshman, I came to find out that out of the class of 4,000 students, I was one of 27 black men to get into that school post Prop 209. And if the data were true, which they were, only 13 of us graduated in 4 years. As we fast forward, I feel like California is at an inflection point. And when we talk about higher ed, it's important that we're talking about how we support students. Here is my call to action for us here. Number one, as we've heard State Treasurer Chung, I think it's important that we stay engaged and that we are committed to ensuring that we are holding our candidates accountable to their words, because words are important, but actions are even more important. So we're going to continue to hold you to what you said tonight. But not only that, I think it's important that we commit to our students in California. So once again, I want to thank Michele for being an amazing moderator, as always. Oprah has nothing on you.
She's retired, so.
Thank you again, State Treasurer, and let's give LA 84 Foundation a round of applause for hosting us as well. And I look forward to seeing you at the next forum, and I'll end by saying Wakanda forever. Thank you. Thank you very much.